ಇವಾಗ ಗುರುಪ್ರಸಾದ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಆಹ್ವಾನಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೆ.
She combines those achievements to a degree that few can hope to approach. ಅವರ ಪ್ರಬಂಧಗಳು ಅಷ್ಟು ಲಿರಿಕಲ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತವೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಚುಯಲ್ ಆಗಿರ್ತವೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಪ್ರಭುತ್ವಕ್ಕೆ ಸತ್ಯ ನುಡಿಯುವಂಥ ಮತ್ತೆ ದಿಟ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳುವಂಥ ಲೇಖಕಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಅವರ ಹೋರಾಟದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಅದನ್ನು ತೋರಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಂದಿರೋ ಧರ್ಮದ ಬಚಾವ್ ಆಂದೋಲನ ಆಗಲಿ ಮುಂತಾದ ಆಂದೋಲನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ. ಅವರು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದಾಗ ಬ್ರೀಫ್ ಟೈಮ್ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ. ಅವರು ಗೌರಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ನ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದು ಈ ಥರ ಇತ್ತು. ಗೌರಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ದು ಈ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಓದಿದೆ, ಇದು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಂತೆ. ಆ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಿಡತೆಗಳ ಬರುವುದಾಗಿ ಕಾಯುತ್ತಾ ಮತ್ತು ಡಿಸೆಂಬರ್ 13 ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳು ಲಭ್ಯವಾಗಿದ್ದು ಕೂಡ ಆ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲೇ. ಇವತ್ತು ಅರುಂಧತಿ ರಾಯ್ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಕರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ಒಂದು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕೆ, ಗೌರಿ ಸ್ಮಾರಕ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನನಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಗೌರಿ ಸ್ಮಾರಕ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಕೋರ್ತೇನೆ. ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ರೈ ಅವರ ನಟನೆ ಬಹುಶಃ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲದೆ ಇರೋರು ಬಹಳ ಕಡಿಮೆ, ಅದು ಇಲ್ಲವೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಇರುವರ್ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಮೂಲಕ ಅವರು ಅತ್ಯುತ್ತಮ ಪೋಷಕ ನಟ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ ಪಡೆದವರು, ಕಾಂಚಿಯವರಿಗೆ ಅತ್ಯುತ್ತಮ ನಟ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ ಪಡೆದವರು, ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಕನಸು ಕನ್ನಡ ಸಿನಿಮಾ ನಿರ್ದೇಶನ ಮಾಡಿದವರು, ನಟ ನಿರ್ದೇಶನ ಮತ್ತು ನಿರ್ಮಾಪಕರಾಗಿ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಚಿರಪರಿಚಿತರಾದವರು. ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಈಗ ರಾಜಕಾರಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಹೋರಾಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ತೊಡಗಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋರು. ನಮ್ಮ ಕರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇವತ್ತು ಅವರು ಗೌರಿ ನೆನಪಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್, ನಿಮಗೆ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಉಮಾಪತಿಯವರು ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತು, ದೆಹಲಿಯಿಂದ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ದೆಹಲಿ ನೋಟ ಕಾಲಂ ಮೂಲಕ ಆಗಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರಜಾವಾಣಿ ಮತ್ತು ವಿಜಯ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಬರಿತಾ ಇದ್ದ ಕಾಲಂನಲ್ಲಿ ನಮಗೆ ಪವರ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಏನು ಅನ್ನೋದು, ದೆಹಲಿ ಕೇಂದ್ರದ ಪವರ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಏನು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮಗೆ ಅವರು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಸಿದ್ದಂಥ ಪತ್ರಕರ್ತರು. ಈಗ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಈಗಿನ ನ್ಯಾಯಪತ್ರದ ಕನ್ಸಲ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಎಡಿಟರ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೂಡ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಇವತ್ತು ಸಂವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್, ನಿಮಗೆ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಆಗಲೇ ಚಂದ್ರು ಪರಿಚಯ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಾಗೆ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ GN ದೇವಿಯವರು ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೊಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದು ನೆಲೆಸಿ ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಲ್ಲ ಚಳುವಳಿಯ ಭಾಗವಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾವು ಯಾವಾಗಾದರೂ ನ್ಯಾಯಪತ್ರಿಕೆ ಸರ್ ಹಿಂದಿನ ದಿನ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಇಷ್ಟೊಸಲಿ ಒಂದು ಲೇಖನ ಬೇಕು ಸರ್, ಇವತ್ತು ನಾಳೆ ಇಶ್ಯೂ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಅವರು ತಕ್ಷಣ ಬರೆದು ಕಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ, ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅಥವಾ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾರಿಗಾದರೂ ಸೂಚಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವರ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಅಮ್ನೇಷಿಯಾ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಆಗಲಿ, ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಆದಿವಾಸಿ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ಸಂಕಲನ ಮಾಡಿರೋ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಆಗಲಿ, ಈ ಥರ ಆದಿವಾಸಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಭಾಷೆಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವರ ವರ್ಕ್ಸು ಇವತ್ತು ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಜನ ಯುವ ರಿಸರ್ಚರ್ಸ್ಗೆ, ಯುವ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಸ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ದಾಟದೀಪವಾಗಿದೆ. ಅದು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಒಳಗಿನ ಬಿಕ್ಕಟ್ಟು, ಅವರ ಲೇಖನಗಳು ಸಂಗ್ರಹ ಕೂಡ ಬಂದಿದೆ. ಇವತ್ತು GN ದೇವರು ನಮ್ಮ ನಡುವೆ ಸಂವಾದ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸರ್, ವೆಲ್ಕಮ್ ಸರ್. ಇವತ್ತು ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಬಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಅನ್ವರ್ಥ ನಾಮ ಆಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ, ಆಲ್ಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಅನ್ನೋದು. ಆಲ್ಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಮಾಡಿದವರು ಪ್ರತೀಕ್ ಸಿನ್ಹಾ ಮತ್ತು ಜುಬೇರ್ ಅವರು. ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಜುಬೇರ್ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಕೇಸಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಲುಕಿಸಿ 2020ನೇ ಇಸ್ವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಿದ್ದ ಒಂದು FIR ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ದೆಹಲಿಗೆ ಕರೆಸಿ ಬಂಧಿಸಿ ಒಂದು ಸಿನಿಮೀಯ ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಯಾಕೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಯಾವುದೊಂದು ಸಿನಿಮಾ ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನ್ ಶಾಟ್ ಶೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಅರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ. ಅದೊಂದು ನಗೆಪಾಟ್ಲು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಅವರು ಇವತ್ತು ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಫೇಕ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಬೆಳೀತಾ ಇರೋ ಕಾಲಘಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಲ್ಟ್ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಅವುಗಳನ್ನ ಸತ್ಯಶೋಧನೆ ಮಾಡೋದು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅದೊಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತು ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಜನ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಭಾಷೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡೋರಿಗೆ ಅದು ಒಂದು ಅದನ್ನು ನೋಡಿ ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಜನ ಕಲಿತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಅವರು ದಾರಿಲಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮೊಹಮ್ಮದ್ ಜುಬೇರ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಕೋರ್ತೀವಿ. ಗೌರಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವ್ರ ತಾಯಿ ಇಂದಿರಾ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಬರಹಗಾರ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ಹುಳಿ ಮಾವು ಮತ್ತು ನಾನು ಎಂಬ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಕೂಡ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಓದಿದ್ವಿ. ಅವರು ಮೇಡಮ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರಂತೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ವೇದಿಕೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಬರಬೇಕು. ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್ಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ನಿರ್ದೇಶಕರಾಗಿ ಪೆಡೆಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯನ್ ಪಿಕ್ಚರ್ಸ್ ಮೂಲಕ ನಿರ್ದೇಶಕರಾಗಿ, ಸಿನಿಮಾಟೋಗ್ರಾಫರ್ ಆಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಗೌರಿ ಸ್ಮಾರಕ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ನ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳಾಗಿ ಕೂಡ ಇರುವ ದೀಪು ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಕೋರ್ತೀನಿ. ಇವತ್ತು ತೀಸ್ತಾ ಸೆಟಲ್ವಾಡ್ ಅವರು ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರ್ತಿ, ಮಾನವ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳ ವಕೀಲೆ, ಗುಜರಾತ್ನ ರಯಟ್ಸ್ನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ದಾಖಲೆ ಸಂಗ್ರಹ ಮಾಡಿ ಅದರ ಸತ್ಯ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಅವರಿಗೆ
again we have like every year, twice in a year all of us are meeting. So I call it a get together of us. So I call you the friends of Gauri, the friends who walked along with Gauri in the political battle, and the comrades and friends who wanted to walk along with Gauri in the coming days, because I am not using Gauri as a past tense. Gauri is a present. That's why all of us are here. So, and I know when I walked in, and my conversation happened first time with the police officer, because he was taking the number of the people who is getting inside, and the details who are all coming inside. It's an interesting thing actually. A person who actually refused to take the protection of the police, even if she had the threat, she told that even I still remember, like, I never wanted a protection from a man who was being but then what is this police is going to give me a protection is the question. But today we are in the middle of police, and we have been frisked, taken our numbers, and the question comes here, like when we walk in, that protection from whom? And then actually the story goes back to what happened to Tigaya, to all these kind of things. And I really respect the officers who is actually in charge here and what the work they are doing, because they will have to be accountable to the state. They will get dismissed if something happens, or suspended, or enquiries are going to get done. So the idea of surveillance and always we are in a fear that if we speak something against the current status quo of the right-wing government or Modi or the politics which is happening in this country, we are going to get attacked. Okay. So, and all of you are suspects. Anybody can attack. Okay. Yeah, that's why you have initiative. In a country, in a democracy where the people are being considered as the suspects, it itself is a problematic era which we are living in. This is actually an indication of the era which we are living in. So, but we accept it. We think protection is about frisking, protection is about CCTV cameras, and democracy is about demanding more protection, more CCTVs, more police around us. So somewhere, in the last decade, we have actually accepted the idea of policing state as a normalcy, and it's a right of the people. Okay. So we are living in the times of that. So now we are actually have to question that. I don't know how many of you questioned when they came in, because it's a question of security. We also think that somebody is going to attack, because everybody is here, Prakash is here, okay, GN sir is here, so they are going to attack. And we need protection. The citizens of this country who has different opinion needs the protection against the Sangh Parivar who is ruling this country to actually speak out. And this is the condition of the democracy where we are living, where we lost our Gauri. So, I'll just get into our trust activism. Last 5 years we have been actually doing this program regularly, not only this program and the birthday and the award which we gave it to Ravish. Post that there is Corona happened and we couldn't continue it. It will be continuing in the next birthday onwards. That means like we'll be constituting an award in January. And the The idea of Gauri Memorial Trust is not to organize actually two memorial programs every year, but in terms of engaging and taking forward what Gauri stood for, what Gauri actually lost her life for, and why Gauri is living in your hearts and minds. Otherwise, you won't be sitting here. So, the question is that taking that idea forward is the idea of our trust. It's not just a question of two events, let's remember, okay. And then there is a problem. We cannot remember a person once in a year. We will be remembering that person's idea, that person every single day in your life. Several of us, because we have uh, we we are friends. We are actually lived with her. We fought with her. So she's actually the energy which is still taking us forward, telling that how whatever way the gateway of BJP's gateway of Karnataka goes, we are not going to stop our fight. And she's our energy. She's our the vigor giving us to fight, and we will never fail. That is for sure. And then when I turn back and look at it, there is an empty chair which is sitting there. And 2 days back, all of us actually, when we speak about justice, there are certain words which has actually been told for the last post 90s onwards. Justice denied, justice served. Okay. Oh, finally the justice happened. Oh, it's a relief that Lisa got a baby. But let's understand, these are the worst words which we can use in the contemporary period. Okay. The question here is that 2 months somebody in a jail without a charge sheet, and finally Supreme Court give a judgment without having anything else to say. You say that finally Supreme Court did the justice. We know the past of the Chief Justice also. But the question here is that what is justice in the contemporary times? There are one more case which we will have to actually look at. That is Widest case, which happened. 11 people actually walked away. What it said? Nirbhaya, it was easy for us to actually, all the people came out onto the street. But Widest actually the judgment says that being a minority, and if it is especially done by the right-wing people, in the pretext of it, I don't call it a riot because I happened to shoot that pogrom. So in that pogrom, whatever you do, there is actually the proof has to be submitted to prove that a woman is raped. So what is all this actually taking us to? What is justice right now? What is justice during the time of the right wing when they rule it? And what is actually justice which has been served by the courts, and what is the character of the courts right now in this country? Let us ask these questions. And we are actually being relieved. We are actually protesting on the street. And I'll speak about good protesters later. And there is another person who he has to be here. What did he do? He just told that you are lying. When you tell you are lying to somebody, to the state, it becomes a crime in this country. So, telling, somebody or to the people that, the state and their missionaries, their entire media missionaries, how the entire country's media missionaries work, and how the corporate media now, actually NDTV also gone. Okay. And so the question is that, does it mean that you can't speak anything, even what is truth in this country? Then actually you will be in jail. Luckily he is out of it. And the children, actually I love her children quite a bit, like Kanaya or like Jignesh. Jignesh is out of the jail anyway. And the third one whom I love the most is Uma. Okay, I love him like a brother to me. What did Uma do? Have you ever went through the videos of what he spoke? But I'm pretty sure next 7 years we can't see it. The similar way, there are several people who's inside the jail for Bhima Koregaon. What did they do? All of us are silent. happening. And all of us are so happy. Saying that we protested. Again, the word, we protested. We protested, we went back home. Okay, I wrote about it, but still what? And so, the work is still going on. We are relentless. Not only Gauri Memorial Trust, Gauri Media Trust, bringing out the, the Nyayabata and nanagauri.com, then, Inadu, the entire media foundation's work. It's actually looking forward and taking forward Gauri's, looking forward. It's taking forward what Gauri dreamed in the space of media. But the question in front of us is not only in the space of media, because I still remember in 2000s when Gauri's transformation to an activist, in Baba, we were all together. So then she actually walked into the people, and she started speaking out about what exactly happening around us. Now there is one good thing which is happening, that all of us, our protests are big. We protest, and we are good in protesting. The next day we will go back, and our only justification in what we are doing against the right thing is that we are protesting. But now actually the time is over. Maybe till mid-90s, we could have gone and protested and made the government to listen to what we are telling. Now it's not the time of protest. It's actually, that era is over. Okay. Recently the entire textbook row, whatever happened, we all protested. Okay. Bilkis one case also, we all protested. Now the question is that how are we going to actually fight the right wing as a collective? All of us, I hope, when you all come into this room, remembering Gauri, we belong to the same collective. So the question in front of us, I have got the sheet, so I'll have finished. So here, what can we do beyond attending town hall protests as well as other protests which is in call for? How can we hold hands with different organizations, even including our trust, to different other organizations which is working in Karnataka, to fight against and build a movement against it and work, all of us, let's say, I will not stop, I'll not stop going for all these, speeches and, I'll say, listening to you and everything. But beyond that, how are we going to take this struggle forward? So, today is not actually, I'll tell you, we are not here to remember Gauri. Today is the day we will have to remember what Gauri stood for, and Gauri making you remember what we will have to fight for. Thank you.
It's my honor to be here with people who I so admire. 3 days ago, I buried my mother, and I didn't know whether my heart would allow me to leave her grave. But I'm here because she would be ashamed of me if I didn't come and speak for her. Gauri was somebody who, every time I wrote something, she would call me with excitement. Arundhati, can I translate? Can I translate? I love you. This was our relationship. And today, Gauri is not here. He started out of jail. And we know what has happened with Bilkis Banu. I was just trying to think, what is this trade? What is the message that this government is trying to give us? In the recent weeks when Tisha was in jail, I was reading with very careful attention the legal documents that the Citizens for Justice and Peace have accumulated in the study of the Gujarat massacre. It is actually phenomenal work, phenomenal work, and I am one of those people who who had little hope that in an institution functioning inside a fascist state would really give us justice. And I'm talking the coming of fascism since the late 90s, which some of us saw and were condemned for seeing, even by liberals. But the reason that the work of Tisha and her organization is so fantastic is because someday, honestly someday, this documentation, this volume of documentation, this meticulous kind of documentation should really provide evidence for war crimes, because that is what happened in Gujarat. I mean, we used to live in a country where if there was a railway accident, the railway minister would resign. Today we live in a country where people get electoral advantage from massacres, fresh massacres and old massacres. When the Gujarat massacre happened, when the Gujarat pogrom happened, we know the urgency with which the BJP and Narendra Modi were calling for elections. Why was that so? What was that urgency? When Bilkis saw her whole family murdered, she was gang raped, her daughter was killed by having her head smashed against a stone. The bodies of people who were killed were decapitated. They were hidden. There was collusion with the state machinery. There was collusion with doctors. There was collusion with so much of what ought to be the institutions that protect our democracy. But instead, just on the eve of an election, the rapists, the murderers were released. What is this message? Maybe they'll be put back. But the point is that the people who released them were released on a process, a legal process, which might have been misused, but no one has said anything about it. The central government ought to have approved. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it hasn't said it didn't. We know the people on the committee, many of them are members of the BJP, and we know that one of them said, it's impossible for these men to have committed those crimes because, Brahmins. So what we are witnessing is an attempt for international reasons to erase the legal trail of the Gujarat program, but for internal reasons to claim its political legacy. And this is very dangerous because it is being done for the people. So what we are seeing in India today is a fusion between the government, the state enforcement agencies, and a political party. They're all becoming one thing. They're all becoming inseparable from each other. When you have a political party that campaigns for Congress Mukt Bharat, what are they really saying? Given that that is the only national opposition party, they are saying we want an opposition-free democracy. Such a thing does not exist. You cannot have an opposition-free democracy. So it's very clear the signaling of where we are heading. Even while those of us who claim to be, many people who claim to be on the left, Many people who are liberals have spent years discussing whether they are fascists or not. Whereas their ideologues are pretty clear about it. Their ideologues are pretty clear about what they want. So, are we a democracy? I mean, the BJP has shown in the last two elections that it can win elections without the Muslim vote, which means, in effect, 200 million people have been disenfranchised, which means, and we see this every day, not just in the case of Pakistan, but everywhere, that we have a constitution, we have some laws, but those laws, it depends on your caste, your religion, your gender. The laws will be applied depending on who you are. And this has been the case for a long time, but now it's very, very clear. So how can a country that has disenfranchised 200 million people, that is working actively at wrecking the very system of government? We have elections, but the election machinery is wrecked. We have a party which is perhaps the richest political party in the world. That wealth came from demonetization, from opaque electoral bonds. And now the richest party in the world can topple governments, can buy members of parliament, members of the legislative assembly. So I have a suggestion for a new people's movement only for our elected representatives. They should campaign like the Kisan Andolan for a MSP for MLAs and MPs, a minimum support price. And perhaps they can, instead of going to these resorts and all, perhaps they can be stored in an Adani godown. And then they can auction themselves and they can demand at least a minimum rate, you know. Because how is it possible? How is it possible that we live in a country where people go out and vote for a person that represents a particular party, and day after tomorrow that person doesn't represent that party, and that's legal? What kind of a system is this? You know, how is what is going on in this country counted as democracy? It's not a democracy anymore. And of course, it will take our liberals and our very sectarian intellectuals like 20 years more. Now they've just about managed to acknowledge their fascism. It will take another 20 years to acknowledge that this isn't a democracy. I was scared of coming because, you know, my mind is full of heartbreak and full of grief for Gauri as well as for my mother. When I visited her grave this morning, I saw her mother at the grave and I thought, you know, is this Gauri's grave or my mother's grave? But when I saw Gauri's mother at her grave, I thought, imagine what it would be like for my mother to be at my grave. And my mind was just, so in a whirl. I was worried whether I would even say anything that made sense today. But I just want to end by saying that look at what has happened to us as people who think of ourselves as those in the resistance movement. I used to say, when people was talking about surveillance, I used to say that in the late 80s and early 90s, हमारे यहाँ तो दो ताला खोला था, एक मस्जिद का, बाबरी मस्जिद का और एक बाजार का. Like they opened the locks of the market and of the Babri Masjid together. And when they opened those two locks, they unleashed two kinds of totalitarianism, two kinds of fundamentalism. One was religious Hindu fundamentalism and the other was economic fundamentalism. And those two fundamentalisms led to two different reasons for the government to become increasingly a security state. You know, whether it was Islamic terrorism or whether it was anti-development, quote unquote, terrorism, Maoist protests, all of it, everything was an excuse for the state to securitize itself. And today we are in a situation, I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it that has brought us to a situation where people who are oppressed, people who have no employment, people who are suffering deeply, are voting for further hellishness upon themselves? What has brought people to believe the reality of propaganda more than the reality that they experience every day in their own homes, in their own kitchens? What is it that makes people who have been oppressed by a caste system for centuries vote for those very people who uphold that system? After all, we know that, today Muslims are disenfranchised, but we come from a society that has dehumanized millions of people by calling them untouchable. And what is it about our imagination that is strengthening that very system now? This is a very, very serious question that we have to ask ourselves. Where did we go wrong? Because if you look at, today this year is the 75th year of India's independence. In Delhi, this city was thick with flags. The saddest thing was that the poorest people, the beggars on the street, the homeless, the starving and the hungry, were selling flags. And so the densest population of flags was where the people who were the poorest. It was very ironical to just see as a vision, And then I think that in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, the revolutionary movements in our country, we were asking for revolution. They were asking for the redistribution of wealth, for the redistribution of land, for land to the tiller. Those movements were crushed. By the 90s, we came to anti-displacement. Whatever little we have, don't displace us. Don't take away whatever little we have. Those were crushed. By the 2000s, the radical demand was Manrega. Minimum wages for a few days, for a family enough, just about what a middle-class person might spend on a meal in a restaurant for the year, for the whole year. That was considered too radical. Now it's not even that. Now it's हम आपको 5 किलो आटा और नमक और चीनी देंगे, फिर हम कहेंगे कि मोदी जी का नमक खाया तो आप हमें वोट दो. Now that has been withdrawn, and now we are fighting, people are fighting for their very citizenship. 2 million in Assam, literally on the verge of being stripped of citizenship. An occupation, a situation where so much of India is just a police state. I'm not even speaking of Kashmir. How can you suddenly shut down on a whim 7 million people and say you have no means of communication, no connection to the outside world for months together? Can you even imagine it? We can't leave our phones for 15 minutes. That was a war crime. So we are like a plane flying backwards. And today the truth is that we know, and people know, that whoever they vote for, they cannot be sure, even if the BJP loses, that it will not buy over the politicians that have been elected, because it has a lot of money to spend. So we are back where we were under colonialism, when there were no institutions. We have to fight on the street, and we have to start not even on the street, but below the street, because the street has now been poisoned. The street has now had its 24 hours a day toxic intravenous drip from not just the news channels, but every kind of signaling from television series, from films, and even Bollywood is being attacked and shut down because it's too cosmopolitan. So we have to start from sub-zero now. But that is a form of liberation because we have to now not think of ourselves as defeated, but think of every small victory as a victory and move from there because the system is broken and I do not think we can fix it. It will break and a new one will be born in its place. But this tyranny will end, it has to end, that is the law of physics. It will end. So let's not lose hope. Inkilab Zindabad.
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇದು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ನಡೀತಾ ಇದೆ, ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಟ್ರೈ ಟು ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್. ಐ won't be apologetic about my English because all through I have written in Kannada. I'm sorry if I sound defiant and rude. There are many competent and deserving persons to do this job, but I have been ordained to carry out this task. I deem it an honor to sit next to such eminent people and going to cherish these moments throughout my life. Will be too happy and feel contented and relieved to play a second fiddle to Ganesh Devi sir. Our deepest, on behalf of you and people of Karnataka, I express our deepest condolences to Miss Mary Roy, mother of Arundhati Raji. And I request her to, could you tell us more about your mother, ma'am? Your mother as an activist and a humanist.
And this is not because she was a great mother. While the daughter in me had a lot of conflict with her, I literally left home when I was 16 because I couldn't take it. But the writer in me admired her immensely, even for being such a tough and unmotherly mother. But the real reason that I admired her was, she belonged to the Syrian Christian community. She married my father, who was Bengali. She was divorced when I was very, very young, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and she left. She came back to a very parochial, closed, elite community that she was, in effect removed from the church and so on. But she then stayed there. And she started a school which is today one of the most wonderful schools in India. And when she came back from, after leaving my father, who I had never seen, the first time I met him, I was in my 20s, she realized that among the Syrian Christians, the inheritance law said that a woman can inherit 1/4 of her father's property or 5,000 rupees, whichever is less. So she challenged the Syrian Christian inheritance law and won, and it was changed, struck down with retrospective effect. So essentially, women won equal rights. But as we all know, in our country, changing the law is not enough because society continues with its ways. But the reason I consider her extraordinary is because as a woman, I have seen few women who, who give uh, who give themselves permission to use the full spectrum of everything they are. Her craziness, her cruelty, her rage, her brilliance, her love, her understanding of education. She was just, when people were speaking about her at her funeral, I said, someday I will turn into a stand up comic and I will make you laugh for 24 hours at a stretch, telling you stories about her. So that was the kind of woman she was. The two of us, I kept saying we were like two nuclear powers. We could not be trusted to be in the same space for too long, but we honored each other and we loved each other deeply. And I will celebrate my mother to the end of my days as somebody who gave me permission in some strange, uh, sometimes kind and sometimes cruel way, but she gave me permission to be everything that I wanted to be, anything that I wanted to be. And to be the cat that walks alone. I'll just tell you one story. I just started thinking about it after she died, actually, that when she left my father and we were living in great poverty, actually, in Uti, and I was being taught by a Australian missionary teacher in a school. I was 5 years old. And for some reason, this missionary teacher would tell me every day almost, I can see Satan in your eyes. Maybe she was right. But anyway, uh, but, the very first sentence that I wrote, and now I'm thinking, how did I write that? Because somebody told me, gave me a pencil and a piece of paper, and I still have that book. And that somebody must have been my mother, and said, write what you feel. And the first sentence I wrote was, I hate Miss Mitten and I think her knickers are torn. So from then, the woman that gave me the freedom to write was she, and that freedom is the greatest gift that anyone could ever have given me. That was my mother.
I want to ask you about the other mother. We normally say mother tongue, but I'll not get into linguistic chauvinism. I know that you live in a world of Bangla, Malayalam, Hindi, English, and so many other languages. I have been fortunate in being Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, English. You mentioned that people's demand should be minimum selling price for uh, the people's representatives.
Not people's demand,
Their demand, their demand. I am thinking of MSP differently. Minimum speech permission. We have now come to a time when we have minimum speech permission. We have all forgotten words. And if words come to us, meanings are forgotten. For instance, I don't recall meaning of democracy at all. And what is the meaning of federalism, etc., etc. Imagine the reality that we have today per person in India some minimum speech permission, which means about 50 crores can use one or two words. Remaining 50 crores can use maybe 2-3 words. Remaining 50 crores use other words which nobody is listening to. Now comes your turn. You have permission in the present, and I'm not fictionalizing. I'm actually talking of you have permission to, and you know how dear word is to you, and word is dear to me. You have permission only to speak 2 or 3 words on your life for India,
On my life.
on my life,
No,
on everybody's. What would be those 2 or 3 words for which India should live? And then once you give those words, I'll ask you the question.
Um, to me, the third would be beauty.
Thank you. The beauty of Tista's documentation of the Gujarat riots. Beauty of a cartoonist's courage to face prison. Beauty of a great public intellectual like you to speak up when all others are scared. What is the source of that beauty and how that source can be awakened today? And there my question ends. Yet said a terrible beauty is born. But
I want to read something, if I can find it.
please, she wants to read something. So, what is the source of? Tista, Gauri, and Arundhati. What is the source of that courage, that beauty?
As a writer, the first thing that I'm alert to in our country is when language changes. And I'm not talking about Hindi, English, Malayalam. I'm not talking about that language. I'm talking about when what is acceptable to be said changes. And to me, that change I sensed deeply when the nuclear tests happened. I sensed that suddenly people were saying things which previously could not be said, and the language of an ugly kind of nationalism, not the love of one's country, but the hate of other countries, or the hate of somebody in your country that constitutes a way of being national. So I wrote an essay called The End of Imagination. And in that essay, I, I, I talked about a conversation that I had with a friend, who was asking me, when I told her that the only dream worth having is to live while you're alive and die only when you're dead. And so she said, which means exactly what? And I said, I'm a writer, so I had to write down on a piece of paper. And this is what I wrote. And this is my manifesto: to love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you, to seek joy in the saddest places, to pursue beauty to its lair, to never simplify what is complicated or complicate what is simple, to respect strength, never power, above all to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget.
Thank you. Very beautiful. Thank you.
In most of your interviews, you have been sounding consistently optimist and been saying that people will fight back. But each time state has come back with an iron hand and put it down. What is the basis you say this, what's the basis of your optimism in people, man?
Actually, that's a very good question, because one of my books is dedicated to those who have learned to divorce hope from reason, because hope is almost something in one's DNA, and when I look at our country, honestly, I really feel truthfully that our problem is not the state. Our problem is society. Our problem is a society that practices caste. Our problem is our society that practices hierarchical thinking, and this is not hierarchical only from those at the top, even from those at the bottom. You know, there is no lateral thinking. There's no solidarity. Everything is about vertical thinking. And that, like I think I said in one of my essays, you know, that if Mao said that a single spark can light a prairie fire, in our country there's no prairie, there's just a maze of, you know, caste and community and religion and identity, and that poor little single spark is just lost trying to find its way out of the maze. But when I look at what other countries in the world have endured, when I look at what happened in Europe during the Second World War, when I look at what happened in Russia during the war, the millions who lost their lives, the people in the Gulag, the Stasi in East Germany, the destruction of the whole of Japan, bombed to non-existence. And even today, the Americans say that the reason we bombed Hiroshima was to actually save lives because the Japanese were not willing to surrender. When you look at the millions and millions of people that were murdered in Europe in the Second World War, in the First World War, when you look at the genocide against Native Indians, when you look at what happened to African Americans, and look at the fight back now. We haven't even begun to know what war is. We haven't begun to understand what true suffering and fighting is. You know, people who have risen from the rubble to build themselves. I mean, what right do we have to feel depressed and finished? Because we had 7 years of BJP? Really? Come on.
But the dark age seems to continue, and there seems to be no expiry date to it.
But that depends on your scale of thinking, you know, in what cycles are we thinking, you know. We cannot, I mean, if you look at it from the right-wing point of view, the RSS has been working for 100 years to get here. You know, are we doing that work? We can't do that kind of work because I feel that only when you have an ideology that is fueled by this kind of monochromatic, monovision, hatred, can you work that hard, ideologically driven? You know, so that is a knife and we are an ocean, you know, and we believe in being an ocean. And we believe that, I believe that our job is to prevent the circle from closing. Certainly, I am one person who believes that nothing in the world can ever be dominated by one religion, one ideology, one sort of point of view. But while we look at that kind of diversity and make room for it, there are some things that we absolutely cannot accept. One of those things is the idea of India as a Hindu nation and everyone else as second-class citizens. Another one is the march of capitalism, which now you see is going to end the planet. One of the most heartbreaking moments in my recent days was I was having dinner with a lot of friends. Many of them were Muslim. And one person said to me, Arundhati, don't you think that if we just accept to be second-class citizens, if we just accept that we shouldn't have a vote, that I shouldn't have a vote because I'm Christian, you shouldn't have a vote, I'm not Christian, I mean my mother is a Christian. So supposing we just agree to this position, then do you think the violence will stop? I said, no, it won't stop till you're crushed, till you're powder. So you better stand up, you know, because right now, the situation is that a climate has been created in this country where the future of this country can be decided by any crazy extremist, either a real attack or a false flag attack or anything, you know. We have just given ourselves over to this spectacle driven election voting and so on. If things go badly, of course, we'll have another, big attack. And we won't know who did it. It could be real, it could be not. So we are going through a tidal situation. And sometimes all we can do is to keep our tent pegs, to keep standing and live to fight another day, you know. But we can't let ourselves lie down and say everything is dark because there's been a horror show for 7 years. Because we also know that this horror show did not start with the BJP, you know. We know that this horror show started even before India became a nation. This horror show started when, in The God of Small Things, the first chapter ends when the love laws were made, the laws that lay down who should be loved and how much. This is a terrible society, and we have to change, you know. It's not just that protesters and movements and people's movements have to change. We have to change in our personal lives. Who do we love? Who do we invite to our table? Who are our friends? What do we value? We can't all say these things and then go back and do the same rituals and the same marriages and the same caste and the same nonsense that we do all the time. Let me tell you that my mother was not given a place in a graveyard because of what she did. We had to invent our funeral rites, which are not over. I will go back tomorrow and I will immerse part of her ashes in the river I grew up on. But I'm proud of it. I'm proud that we did not find a place in a space which is casteist, even though it's Christian. I'm proud of these things. So each of us has plenty of fighting to do, even in our personal lives. We can't be just like, expect Gauri and Tista and Arundhati and Prakash Rai to do these things. We have to do it in our own lives too, and we have to start now. Practiced by Christians, it is practiced by Sikhs, it is practiced by Muslims, and of course it is the fundamental building block of Hindu society. So it cannot, and it is the saddest and most shameful thing about us. You know, we can stop blaming BJP, RSS, and everything if we understand that, you know, that after all, when you look at, somebody just got me to sign this little book I wrote called The Doctor and the Saint, but if you look at even capitalism today, you look at who are the big corporations, Reliance, Mittal, Adani, it all comes from a certain caste. It is caste and capitalism that has made a peculiar alchemy in our country today. Caste has modernized. Caste has become part of corporatism. You know, if you look at who owns the newspapers, who are the editors, who are the journalists, look at it through a prism of caste, then we will all stop feeling so virtuous. You know, the whole thing is that there's so much rhetoric and there's so little that actually moves on the ground. I mean, we have less than 3% or 4% of our population that marries outside of their caste, you know. And what does it mean when you have the whole world and India moved by a movement that called itself Me Too? And we have Bilkis Bano, and what has happened to her? Where is everybody? Why aren't we absolutely outraged by this? I learned as a writer after the Gujarat pogrom, it's not enough to describe horror, because I have described it. I have described it in detail, and I have had people turn to me and say, so what? You know, it is important for us within our, you know, even to understand, for example, when we are looking at an organization like the RSS, which understands caste much better than even some of the parties that said that they were fighting against caste in UP and Bihar. But they were not fighting against caste, they were fighting for the upliftment of their caste, which is great, which is good. But that allowed a space for the RSS to move in and turn the most oppressed people against each other. You know, that is the danger of the society that we are in. We are up against a very clever foe that understands this society very, very deeply, more deeply than the Congress party, which claimed to be a secular party, but was entirely organized by dominant caste people. Didn't even begin to understand what's going on the ground, you know. So no, we cannot have any form of equality without the annihilation of caste. And the annihilation of caste is not merely up to the state, it is up to society also. And as I said, I think it's the failure of our society. But we have to understand. I mean, today I see a lot of young people raising the slogan of Jai Bhim and Inqilab Zindabad. And until we understand the connection between capitalism and caste, we will not move forward. We'll keep treading water, you know. And the point about the armed struggle is, I always maintain that, you know, we need a biodiversity of resistance. And today, we know under what kinds of conditions. I've spent weeks inside Bastar and written a little book called Walking with the Comrades. And I have been questioned about that. The point is that inside the forest, 4 days walk from the road, when you have paramilitary and you have vigilante groups like Salwa Jurum burning, raping, killing, forcing Adivasis to move, to live in the forests, not able to come out and sleep in their villages for fear of what is going to happen. And on the TV studios, everyone wants them to be Gandhian. And I said, but first of all, they can't go on a hunger strike because they're already starving. They can't boycott foreign goods because they don't have any goods. And last of all, you need a theater. You need a theater, you need an audience to be a Gandhian. You can't do it away from nowhere in the middle of the forest, you know. So what form a struggle takes, to me, is not always just ideologically dictated. It is tactics, you know. And so I don't blame just the left, although I think the inability of the left to understand caste is a huge problem, because then you are actually forsaking your actual constituency. I mean, I know that things have slowly started to change, but when I wrote, I know it hasn't been translated into Kannada, but when I wrote The God of Small Things, it was all about the failure of the left. I mean, it was not all about, but substantially about the failure of the left to understand caste, to distance itself from caste. And what happened in the end was that, there was a huge outcry against me by the mainstream left. And there was a case against me for corrupting public morality, because the book ends with the physical and beautiful love between a Syrian Christian woman and a person from the Dalit community. And this was, the outrage was disguised as something else. But this was the outrage. How can this happen? How can you talk? How can you break the love laws? But the whole book was about transgression of every kind. And this transgression is very important in our society, you know. So to answer your question, I think that the caste system, just like colonialism, you know, colonialism, how many soldiers, British soldiers were there in India to rule this great subcontinent? Not many. Everyone collaborated. Just like that, for thousands of years, a very small minority of Brahmins, Baniyas, upper caste people have found such incredibly clever ways to continue their domination. It may look secular, it may look left, it may look corporate, it may look capital, but ultimately it's the same folks doing the same thing, you know. So we have to see through that. Listening to these questions, I just keep wishing my work was translated into Kannada, because I have written about all these things quite extensively. And the fact is that I keep saying this fire in the ducts, you know, this, like, the system is gamed now. The system is rigged. I don't mean just by EVMs and all that, but we do have a first past the post system where a very small minority of the population can result in a huge majority of the seats, and the mathematical calculations of that mean that we are in a very serious problem here. And then we have the absolutely serious problem of the corporate media, which has a conflict of interest. You know, it is what it is. The corporate media, where either it's directly owned by companies that are mining, that are privatizing, that are doing everything possible to control the economy, and the capital is going into fewer hands, and the messaging is in very few hands. So the thing is that all our energies need to be put into raising these questions, more than just all our energy going into campaigning for an already rigged and skewed election. You know, now when we come to 2025 or 26, I think, when delimitation happens, the skewed relationship with the North and South is going to change even more. You have a situation where states like UP, if you look at a map, I was just looking at a map of government, based on government figures, the poorest areas in the country are in the Gangetic Plain, currently mostly ruled by the BJP. Poorest. And the district that I come from, Kottayam, for example, the first district to be 100% literate, the only district in India to have 0% poverty. You look at Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, I think, Andhra, you know, people who have population reduction, people whose progressive politics are making things better, are then going to suffer because they'll have fewer seats, and the North will have more seats, and therefore fewer and fewer regional geographic regions will decide who will rule this country. This is going to create a very serious problem in the future. So we need to think about where to direct our energies. Otherwise, it's like putting water into a bucket that's leaking. It's never going to fill unless we understand these structural things. The law of physics, you know. So the people who show the greatest courage are the ones who have the greatest desire to change our society, and obviously the ones that therefore take the greatest risk. The second question about freedom of speech. See, this is a really huge question about how freedom of speech is being shut down. Again, censorship comes, and in the world today, the censorship comes from the state, it comes from the corporations that own the social media, and it comes from society itself, where we have now both progressives, revolutionaries, rightists, leftists, statists, feminists, castists, anti-castists, everyone is trying to shut down everybody else. And this is a situation that is so terribly dangerous because we are creating a sort of street with tripwires. You know, nobody can walk, nobody can speak, nobody can think, and nobody's thinking twice about trying to shut another person down. Sometimes not based on what they're saying, but based on who they are. So it isn't this is not a question that I can answer because none of us have an answer to it, and all of us are struggling to keep spaces open where things can be said. And what are, I mean, today we should mention, definitely we should mention the fact that I'm actually so happy to be here speaking at the memorial of Gauri, who was shot down for what she said. But only a few weeks ago, another writer, Salman Rushdie, was nearly assassinated. And only a few miles away from here, there were people chanting, Sar se tan juda. Everyone is trying to shut down everyone. The point is there isn't a single religion that does not criticize another religion. That's fine, but we all have to live together. We find ways of living together. And if we're going to kill everyone that we disagree with, there's going to be no space for disagreement, just space for assassination, either physically or of character or of ideas or of the mind. So this, when Salman Rushdie was attacked, you had all the major presidents and prime ministers in the Western world rushing to say that his fight is our fight. But when they bombed and destroyed all of Japan, when they bombed Afghanistan, when they bombed Iraq, how many writers did they silence? How many writers did they kill? How many musicians did they shut down? Does that not count at all for them? You have Julian Assange, a brilliant man, in jail, literally dying in jail. You have Edward Snowden, who I met in Moscow, not allowed to speak. He was only speaking the truth, as was Julian Assange. So nobody has free speech. Some people pretend to have free speech. The next question about the fact that this system is gamed, that, for example, the people who are voting for the BJP are the same people who benefited from reservation, who benefited from policies of the previous government. In fact, first of all, we must understand that we should be very careful of reducing the whole debate about caste oppression only to reservation, because very few people, and reservation is very important because those few people who benefit from it begin to be able to have a voice, but very few people benefit from it. The rest of caste oppression continues. So that's not the only issue against caste, but even the previous government, when they started to privatize education, and that is going at speed now. It appears to be a benign act, but it is pushing OBCs, Dalits, and Muslims who are now pushed down the economic ladder out of educational institutions. The only reason I say I have hope is because I hope that these, who are the majority of this population, will understand what's being done to them. That's where my hope comes from. Not just in the air, but people must surely be understanding what is being done to them. They must surely see that whatever little space was opened up has been taken away and is being taken away at speed. And when that majority understands that they are being pitted against each other only in order, the last question talked about divide and rule. Do you think the British the British invented divide and rule. No, caste is divide and rule, you know. So that is there. And the question regarding the criticism of me, yes, there was bitter criticism when I wrote the introduction to Annihilation of Caste. I can understand that criticism given, you know, the society that we come from. The reason I did it was because Annihilation of Caste was actually a speech written to be delivered to a dominant caste audience. And I think in our society, while the Annihilation of Caste is widely read, it's one of the best-selling texts in this country, but deliberately avoided, again, by the dominant castes. And by writing this, I hoped it would breach that and move into a space which didn't want to read it. But because of the criticism, I actually separated it, and now it comes out as a little book of its own. And I hope that allays at least some of the anger against me, because I still stand by that text. Thank you. So this is the last question. You've spoken about capitalism and caste. When do we seek or dream of women's liberation? World over, it seems men are fighting each other while women and girls seem to be waiting for permission to be fully human. Look, if we are waiting, it's our problem. You know, we don't wait. My mother didn't wait. I didn't wait. None of the characters in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness waited. None of the characters in The God of Small Things waited. Today, I will say that some of the most magnificent people in the world are women, and also the people who murder their babies because they're girls in this country. We live in many centuries simultaneously, but I think, and I feel now, that, you know, we can't keep on talking about being oppressed. No one else is going to fight that fight for us, you know. Something wrong when you say we've been oppressed for thousands of years. We've got to stand up. We've got to fight. And fighting means, let me tell you, the most wonderful thing is to be a free woman. If I actually rushed down for my mother's, because my mother passed away, but if I had come here directly, you know what I would have been wearing? I would have been wearing a t-shirt which said, Akeli, Awara, Azad. And my mother was Akeli and Azad. I added the Awara to it. And we can add a lot more, because what we are fighting for eventually is to be happy, to be allowed to be the full range of who we are. And that's what I started with. My mother showed me that. We don't have to be nice people. We don't have to be good wives and good daughters and good mothers. I loved my mother because she was a badass mother, you know. Thank you.
ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಈ ಸಭಾಂಗಣ ಬುಕ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಇಸ್ ದಟ್ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ವೆರಿ
ಹಲೋ
ಫಿನಿಶ್ ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್
ಹಲೋ
ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಈ ಸಭಾಂಗಣ ಬುಕ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೆ ನಾನು. ಆವಾಗ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಹುಷಾರು ನೋಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾಡು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಯಾವುದೋ ಮೊನ್ನೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯದೊಂದು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ನಡೀತು, 50 ಜನನೂ ಬಂದಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಿದೆ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿ. ಖುಷಿಯಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಗೌರಿ ಸಪೋರ್ಟರ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಗೌರಿ ಅಂತ ಆಲೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡೋರು ಇನ್ನೂ ತುಂಬ ಜನ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ ಒಂದೆಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ನಿರೀಕ್ಷೆ ಹುಟ್ಟಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋಂಗೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಗೌರಿ ಹೋಗಿ. ಈ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ 5 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಇನ್ನೂ ಹೋಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಅವಳು. ವಿಕಾರ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಆಗೋಯ್ತು ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ 5 ವರ್ಷ ಇನ್ನೂ ನೆನ್ನೆ ನಡೆದಂಗೆ ಆಗಿದೆ. ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ತುಂಬಾ ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು ಅವಳನ್ನು ನೋಡಿ, ಅವಳ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಬಟ್ ಪ್ರತಿ ಸತಿ ಈ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಫಂಕ್ಷನ್ ಆದಾಗ ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಒಂದು ಕಡೆ ಪ್ರೊಟೆಸ್ಟಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಕರೀತಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿ ಹೋಗಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದೊಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಹೋಗ್ತೀನಿ. ಹೋದಾಗೆಲ್ಲ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡೆ ನಾವು ಕೇಳಿದಂಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಲಂಕೇಶ್ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಈ ವಾತಾವರಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಪರಿಸ್ಥಿತಿಲಿ ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋರು ಅಂತ. ಅದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ನಾನು ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ರೆ ಅವಳು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋಳು ಅಂತ ತುಂಬ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅವಳು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಂತೂ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬೇಸತ್ತಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ನಾನು ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ನೋಡಿ 2 ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು, ಟೆಲಿವಿಷನ್ ಹಾಕಿ ನೋಡಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೂ ಪೇಪರ್ ಓದಬೇಕು ಅಥವಾ ಒಂದು ಇಂಟರ್ನೆಟಲ್ಲಿ ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ನೋಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಒಂದು ಫೆಟಿಗ್, ಒಂದು ಡಿಪ್ರೆಷನ್, ಒಂದು ದೇರ್ ಇಸ್ ನೋ ಹೋಪ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಅಷ್ಟು ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಿ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಆದ್ರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬೆಳವಣಿಗೆ ಒಂದೊಂದ್ಸತಿ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ನೋಡ್ದಂಗೆ ಶಿವಮೊಗ್ಗ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ಆಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ, ನಮ್ಮೂರು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಶಾಂತಿಯುತವಾಗಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ನಾನು ಚಿಕ್ಕವಳಿಂದ ಹೋಗ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ, ರಜದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮಮ್ಮ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋರು. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಎಲ್ಲ ಜಾತಿಯು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗೇ ಇದ್ದರು. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿನಂಗೆ. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಕಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇ ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಈ ನಡುವೆ ನೋಡ್ತಿರೋದು ಹಿಜಾಬ್ ಕೇಸ್ ಆಗಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಬಿಲ್ಕಿಸ್ ಬಾನು, ಅದಂತೂ ಭಾಳ ಡಿಸ್ಟರ್ಬ್ ಆಯಿತು ನನಗೆ. ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿರೋರು ಈ ಸಿಚುವೇಷನ್ಲಿ? ರೇಪಿಸ್ಟನ್ನು ತಂದು ಹಾರ ಹಾಕಿ ಸ್ವೀಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಆಚರಣೆ ಮಾಡುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ದಿನ ಬಂದಿದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಏನಾಗಿದೆ ಅಥವಾ ನಮಗೇನಾಗಿದೆ, ಇದು ಬರೀ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಷಿಯನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಾನು ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗಷ್ಟೇ ಒಂದು ಸತಿ ಡಾಕ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್ರಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ ಗೌರಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಫ್ರೀ ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಅನ್ಲಿಮಿಟೆಡ್ಗೆ. ಆವಾಗ ರವೀಶ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಜರ್ನಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಾಗ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಇಂಟರ್ವ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದೆ, ಏನಾರು ಇಸ್ ದೇರ್ ಎನಿ ಹೋಪ್, ವಿಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಇಫ್ ದ ರೆಜಿಮ್ ಚೇಂಜಸ್, ಇಫ್ ದ BJP ಈಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ದೇರ್, ವಿಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಅಂತ. ಅವ್ರಂದ್ರೆ ನೋ, ಇಟ್ ವೋಂಟ್ ಚೇಂಜ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಆರ್ ವೆಪನೈಸ್ಡ್. ಜನರ ಕೈಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಸ್ತ್ರ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ನೀವು ಗುದ್ದಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಆಗಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಸಿಚುವೇಶನ್ ತಂದಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾರೇ ಬಂದರೂ ಅದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ಗೊತ್ತಾಗ್ತಾಯಿದೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ. ಇದಾದಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ, ಪ್ರಕಾಶ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಇದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿಗೆ ಇದು ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಐ ಆಮ್ ವೆರಿ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಫುಲ್ ಟು ಹಿಮ್. ಐ ಆಮ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪಿ. Arundhati, of course, I'm very happy she's here. We've been calling her many times, but she's not had the time, or she was preoccupied with other things, or it didn't work out whenever we called you. And thank God you come this time. I'm very happy for that. And in fact, Gauri published your first book, I think, in Kannada, December 13th ಅಂತ. ಗೌರಿ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಕಾಶನ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಅದು ಅನುವಾದ ಮಾಡಿದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ. And it went, people read, and it was part of the introduction to Kannada audience that way. And I'm happy Gauri did that. And one more thing, last thing I want to say is, Professor Sridhar message ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರು ಮೊನ್ನೆ. ಅರುಂಧತಿ ಬರ್ತಾರಾ, ಅವ್ರ ತಾಯಿ ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ, ಮೊನ್ನೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರು ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. I'll just read that out and end it, because I know all of you are waiting for Prakash to listen to Prakash. Looking forward, my mother would be ashamed of me if I did not speak in Gauri's memory. And I think that's very beautiful. Thank you, Arundhati. Thank you, everybody. ಮುಂದೆ ಹೀಗೆ ಸಪೋರ್ಟ್ ಇರಲಿ, ಮುಂದೆ ಇದೇ ಥರ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಿಂದ ಹೋರಾಟನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ ನನ್ನ ಭಾಷಣ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸೊ ಮಚ್.
ಜನಗಳ ನೆರವಿನಿಂದನೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ದೇಣಿಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಇದ್ದರೆ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಒಂದು ಕಾಣಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಬೇಕು. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಆಯಾ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಗೆ ಬೇಕಾದ ಹಣವನ್ನು ರೈಸ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಯಾವುದನ್ನು ದೊಡ್ಡದಾಗಿ ಸಂಗ್ರಹ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದೇ ಪಾಲಿಸಿ. ಎರಡನೇದು, ಅರುಂಧತಿಯವರು ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು, ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫ್ರೀಡಮ್. ಅದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಬ್ಯೂಟಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಮಾತು ಸೇರಿಸಿದ್ರು. ಅದು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಅನ್ನಿಸ್ತಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ನಾವು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರರು ಮಾತಾಡುವಾಗ ಸಮಾನತೆ, ಸ್ವಾತಂತ್ರ್ಯ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿರ್ತೀವಿ, ಆದರೆ ಸೌಂದರ್ಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಾತಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸೌಂದರ್ಯ ಅಂದರೆ ನೋಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಚೆಂದ ಇರೋ ಬಾಹ್ಯ ಈಸ್ಥೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಬಹುಶಃ ಅವರು ಸೌಂದರ್ಯ, ಬ್ಯೂಟಿ ಅಂದಾಗ ಅವ್ರ ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಔಚಿತ್ಯ, ಒಂದು ಪ್ರೊಪ್ರೈಟಿ, ಒಂದು ಆರ್ಡರ್ ಇರಬೇಕು ಸೊಸೈಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ. ಇದನ್ನು ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ನಂಗೆ ಭಾಳ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಜ್ಞಾಪಕ ಬರೋದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಶೇಕ್ಸ್ಪಿಯರ್ನ ಮ್ಯಾಕ್ಬೆತ್ ನಾಟಕನೇ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ಟೈರೆಂಟ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ ಬಂದರೆ ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಲೈನ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಲೀಪ್ ಟು ಅವರ್ ಪಿಲ್ಲೋಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಫುಡ್ ಟು ಅವರ್ ಟೇಬಲ್ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವು ನೆಮ್ಮದಿಯಾಗಿ ಊಟ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗ್ತಾಯಿಲ್ಲ, ಮಲ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕಾಗ್ತಾಯಿಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾದ ನಮ್ಮ ಪರ್ಸನಲ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ದಾಳಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಕೆಟ್ಟೋಗುತ್ತೆ ಆವಾಗ. ಹೀಗೆ ಈ ಮೂರನೇ ಆಯಾಮವನ್ನು ಅವರು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ಇದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಡೈಮೆನ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ನಿಮಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರೋ ಹಾಗೆ ಅವರ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ನೋವಿನ ನಡುವೆಯೂ ಕೂಡ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮಗೆ ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸ್ಫೂರ್ತಿದಾಯಕ ಅದು. ಅದನ್ನೇ ನಾವು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸ್ತಾ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಾವು ಗೌರಿಯನ್ನು ಕೇವಲ ಒಬ್ಬ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಆಕೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಲೆಗೆಸಿ ಇದೆ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಅವರು ಪೇಪರ್ನ ನಾವು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆದರೆ ನಾನು ಧೈರ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ, ಗೌರಿ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ವೈವಿಧ್ಯಮಯವಾಗಿ ಇವಾಗ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಪಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸುಮಾರು 200ಕ್ಕೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಜನ ಹೊಸ ಲೇಖಕರು ಇವತ್ತು ಆ ನ್ಯಾಯಪಥಕ್ಕೆ ಬರೀತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಆ ಗೌರಿ ಆಶಯವನ್ನು ವಿಸ್ತರಿಸ್ತಾ ಹೋಗುವಂಥ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಮೇಲೆ ಇದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಮೇಲೆ ಇದೆ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಯಾಣವನ್ನು ಮುಂದುವರ್ಸೋಣ. 29 ಜನವರಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸೇರೋಣ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಈ ಮಾತು ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಧನ್ಯವಾದ. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮುಕ್ತಾಯ ಮಾಡೋಣ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಫಸ್ಟ್, ಪ್ರತಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಿಮ್ಮೊಂದಿಗೆ.